Hi, my name is Paul Nation, and I do research on vocabulary learning and on language teaching. You'll find a lot of my research in my articles, which are available free under publications on my website. In this video, I'm going to talk about one particular activity, the linked skills activity. This is a really useful language learning activity because it applies useful principles of learning. The linked skills activity is really simple. It involves focusing on the same piece of material 3 times, one after the other. Now you might remember that the 4 skills are the skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. In the linked skills activity, the same material is focused using 3 of these skills. So, for example, the learners will listen to something, then they might read about it, and then they might write about it. Or they might read about something, then listen to the same text, and then talk about it with the partner. So the same material is focused on 3 different times by the learners working on the same material. Now let's look at some examples of the linked skills activity. Here's one example. The learners read a text. So this involves the skill of reading. Then they listen to questions which are based on the text and have to write answers to them. This actually involves 2 skills, listening and writing. That's the second step of that linked skills activity. Then the third step, if the text was about food safety, then they have to write guidelines for storing food safely. So this uses the same information from the reading text, from the comprehensions that they focused on in listening and writing, and now they have to do some writing to make a set of guidelines based on that particular text. So you can see that the same material is focused on 3 times. A good linked skills activity keeps focus on the same material. Here's another example. The learners use their own experience to write guidelines for storing food safely. They use their own experience and their background knowledge about this. So they're working in a pair or small group and writing a set of guidelines. After they've written the guidelines, they talk about their guidelines with another student from a different group. So this is a speaking skill use in the activity. So first we have writing and then we have speaking. Then the third step is they now read the text about food storage and safety. So instead of reading the text first, they've actually prepared for reading the text by writing things from their previous experience, by talking about it with other students, and then they come to read this text. If they'd read the text first, the text might have been a bit difficult for them. Because they've already written about the text and spoken about it before, they will find it much easier to read the text. Typically, the third step in a linked skills activity is somewhat like a fluency development activity, in that the material is generally now familiar because they've already met it 2 times in the previous steps, and they can now perform at a higher than usual level with that material. Let's look at some more examples. In this particular linked skills activity, the learners see a set of questions, but they don't see the text that the questions are based on. They try to guess the answers to the questions without having seen the text. It's quite a good idea for them to work in pairs when they do this part of the activity. This is predominantly a reading activity because they have to read the questions, but it also involves bits of speaking and writing when they try to guess what the answers to the questions might be. The second step of the activity is that they now listen to the text. Either the teacher reads it aloud or they listen to a recording of the text. And they correct their answers to the questions as they listen to the text. The third step of the activity is for learners now to talk about the differences between their guesses and between the correct answers to the questions. So they do this activity in pairs or in groups of 4, and they talk about what they got wrong on the first step of the activity and what they got right on the first step of the activity. So we see the same material being focused on 3 times across the 3 skills of reading, listening, and speaking. A linked skills activity is a kind of procedure. A procedure is an activity which has several steps. In other videos, we have looked at different procedures, such as the pyramid procedure, where learners work on things on an individual level, then they work in pairs, then they work in groups, then they work as a whole class on the same material. We have also looked at the expert group family group procedure, where learners work in expert groups on a part of the material, with each group working on a different part. And then they come together in family groups to put their parts together to deal with the main part of the activity. Linked skills is a kind of procedure like this because each linked skill activity has 3 steps involving the same material. Let's look at another example of the activity. The learners listen to a text being read by the teacher, and they can take notes from that text if they wish. So that's a listening part of the procedure. The second step in the linked skill activity here is the learners then write about what they can remember from the text. So they make a list of notes and ideas that they can recall. They can either do this individually or working in pairs. So we've had a listening step and now a writing step. Then the learners do a 4-3-2 activity based on the information from the text that they listen to. In the 4-3-2 activity, one learner is the speaker and the other learner is the listener in each pair. And so the speaker will then present material that they heard in the listening part and the notes that they took in the writing part, and then use it in the 4-3-2 activity. So these are some examples of linked skills activities where the learners work through the same material, but each time they use a different skill. The linked skill activity helps vocabulary learning because, first of all, it involves repetition. The same material is focused on 3 times, each time through a different skill. The second feature of the linked skill activity which helps learning is that it involves varied use. Each time they do the activity is done through a different skill, and this provides an opportunity for varied use. So we have not only repetition, but we have varied repetition in the linked skills activity. And varied repetition provides a deeper quality of processing than simple verbatim repetition. When you make a linked skills activity, it's quite useful to start with a reading text. When I say start with a reading text, I mean start making the activity. It could be that the reading text is actually read in either the first or the second or the third step of the activity. But the reading text can provide content and language which can then be used for the other parts of the activity. So if you take a text from the course book, it's not too hard to then change this text or use this text in a linked skills activity. If you have a reading text, then of course that provides an opportunity for reading, but it could also provide an opportunity for listening. If the last activity in a linked skills activity involves speaking or writing, then it's quite useful if one of the previous steps in the linked skills activity also involves productive use of the language. This is because turning receptive knowledge into productive knowledge is quite a difficult step. So if the first step in a linked skills activity involves receptive knowledge, that is, listening or reading, then this provides some support for a speaking or a writing activity in the next step, and that speaking or writing activity in the second step can provide very useful support for a speaking or writing activity in the third step. If your main focus is on writing, for example, it would be quite good to have an activity which starts with reading, then involves speaking, and then involves writing. And the reason for putting writing last is because by doing the first two steps of the activity, the learners can reach a higher than usual level in their writing because you've turned the writing into an experience task. That is, the learners have already become familiar with the content and language involved in the activity. They now just have to focus on using that content and language in a written form. How do we know if the linked skills activities are working well or not? Well, there are a set of criteria that we can use to judge such activities. The first thing to look at is simply, is the activity going well or not? That is, are the learners able to do the activity, to make reasonable answers to the tasks in each step of the activity? If the learners are having difficulty, it may be necessary either to change the order of the skills in the linked skill activity or to find some kind of text which is a bit easier for the activity. The second criterion is to think, is the sequence of skills in the activity a suitable one for the learning goals that you want? So as the learners move from one step of the activity to the other, can they easily make that step and do the next activity reasonably well? If they can't, you might have to consider changing the skill order in the activity, to put listening before speaking or to put reading before writing, for example. The third thing to look at in a linked skills activity is to see if the same content, both language content and ideas content, is being repeated at each step of the activity. Does the same content occur in all three steps of the activity? Are the same words, the same topic words, used in each of the three steps of the activity? Are similar collocations and grammatical phrases used in each of the three steps of the activity? The linked skills activity is a useful activity because it provides repetition. Teachers need to check that this repetition is actually occurring, and if it isn't, they need to think how they can change the activity to make sure that repetition occurs. The fourth thing to look at when evaluating a linked skills activity is to make sure that retrieval is occurring. When learners do step 2 and step 3 of a linked skills activity, can they do it without having to look back at material? Can they do it without having to see what was done in the first step or the second step? That is, are they retrieving these ideas and the language needed to express these ideas from their memory. If they're not, it might be useful to use a text in the first step of the activity, but in the second and third step of the activity, just to use a few cue words or a few simple notes to help them retrieve what they did in the first step of the activity. It's important that teachers look at the activities that occur in the classroom to make sure that useful principles of learning are occurring in the activities. Is repetition occurring? Is there opportunity for quality of processing through varied retrieval and through ordinary retrieval occurring? Is there plenty of time on task? If a teacher looks at an activity and looks for these principles, this becomes a way of improving the quality of the activity so that next time that it's done with better learning results. The linked skills activity is described in detail in one of my books. This book is available free from my website or free from the Compass Publishing website. Chapter 15 of that book, What Should Every ESL Teacher Know? Not EFL teacher, but ESL teacher. What should every ESL teacher know? That whole chapter is about the linked skills activity, with plenty of examples and analysis for you to help understand the activity. Read that chapter and learn more about this really useful activity. The linked skills activity is one of my favorite activities, and that's because it applies really good principles of language learning. It seems like a difficult activity because of the 3 steps involved, but after you make 2 or 3 of these linked skills activities, you'll find that they're actually very easy to make, and you can very quickly, starting from a reading text, make a nice linked skills activity. But be sure to check that your linked skills activity is a good one by monitoring it using the criteria that we've just looked at. Good luck with your teaching.